is 1986 and the world would be majorly changed by the events going on over within the Soviet-controlled lands of what would eventually be Ukraine, where the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, named the V.I. Lenin Nuclear Power Station, would have a major power surge and due to some costly human errors would eventually have its reactor ignite, sending tons of radioactive fallout into the atmosphere, killing anyone who was in close proximity to it and forcing everyone else to evacuate the area. Even within the rest of Europe, atmospheric effects reached them and the explosion could be heard in some parts of the UK, with the first explosion being said to be 225 tons of TNT. This whole event completely devastated the Soviet Union and the people of this part of Ukraine, and as a result, the government would set up what was known as the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. That was a 30-kilometer radius or 18.6 miles around the what was believed to be defunct nuclear power plant. However, this wasn't the end of the tale. This whole event was due to questionable experiments happening in the area, and now with the land cleared of all people, those experiments went ahead again, and after calculation errors, another incident would happen, leading to what was named as the second Chernobyl disaster of 2006, creating yet another zone that was much larger this time. But the difference was, this time it was filled with terrifying anomalies, mutated creatures, and heavily armed military personnel looking to kill anyone who ventured into their domain. So how did this all happen? What exactly was the second Chernobyl event? What caused it to happen? And what exactly were these experiments? Well, in today's episode, we'll be diving into the zone and exploring its mysterious and terrifying history. This is the full history of the STALKER zone, named the Zone of Alienation. Before the first catastrophe that happened, this whole area of Chernobyl was set up as an ultra-secret scientific area for the Soviet Union, a place where they poured tons of financial, scientific and military forces into the area to make sure their goals and ambitions work. These experiments set themselves up in a wide variety of areas, such as the secret city of Limansk and Pripyat, but all of them had different ambitions and products. The Institute of Crop Selection and Genetics, or the Agroprom Research Institute for example, which was set up within the 1960s, was officially made to create experimental crops, making it look like they were just trying to solve a food crisis for the local area or wider Soviet Union. However, unofficially, this institute was created to research consciousness control, where the researchers would look at being able to control the minds of animals by installing in them small commands. With Limansk, for example, the researchers here would be looking at a way to harness the power of radio waves to make it so they could be powerful enough to use them as a tool, to make it so that anyone who comes into contact with them would have immediate and unquestioning loyalty towards the Soviet Union. And that is how they would get even bigger during this period of the Cold War. However, the biggest piece of research that was conducted during this time that actually linked most of these experiments together was to study something that was simply known as the noosphere. The theory behind what this thing is comes from the writings of both Vladimir Vernadsky and Teilhard de Chardin, who believed that there was more than just the atmosphere and the biosphere, and that there was a noosphere as well, which denoted the sphere of human thought. The noosphere within the Soviet Union researchers' data here in Chernobyl and the surrounding areas, however, was indeed real, and was in fact an invisible field that surrounded the Earth that was linked to the human minds and their thoughts. It was also argued that it was affected by them and could also affect the human minds as well, although more research was required by the Soviet Union to see what this noosphere actually was, what it was capable of, and how it could be manipulated to use in the day-to-day. With these experiments going ahead, they were consuming a ton of energy, and that ultimately meant a lot of strain on the power plant. Eventually, due to how unstable these experiments and pieces of research were, it would lead to them, or at least one of them, to cause a huge power surge within reactor 4 of the Chernobyl power plant, and with that, the first disaster in 1986 had begun. done. As the severity of the situation quickly became clear to the Soviet Union and people in the surrounding areas, the government stepped in and quickly evacuated everyone within Pripyat and the nearby locations, to the point where the whole area was pretty much deserted apart from an odd few, some die-hard citizens who refused to move from the area having lived there for many years, including a man named Forrester, as well as some of the scientific teams who were working within those secret laboratories. This had now worked perfectly into the hands of the Soviet Union, who, despite having to cover up a major disaster and the loss of a nuclear power plant and people of the area, now had a vast region that was completely deserted, no one watching it, no one expecting anyone to be in the area, and now that the zone was set up, they could monitor who is going in and out of the area. It was the perfect opportunity for the USSR to continue their experiments without having any worries at all. The world, or in this case the zone, was their oyster. With this now in mind, the scientists upped their efforts with their research as they became more active than ever, and for the next 5 years got on with all of the experiments and studies. By 1991, however, the Soviet Union would officially fall, and the Cold War was technically over once and for all. For the people in the zone, once working under the Soviet government, this collapse did absolutely nothing to slow them down, and actually played right into their hands. This was all because the new Ukrainian government that had taken over from the collapsed Soviet Union was extremely weak, and despite being told rumors of strange experiments happening within the zone, were unable to do anything about them, as they lacked the resources to send anyone in to fully investigate and stop the people responsible. That said, they did want to try and do their best to follow up these reports and shut down anything illegal going on within the zone, and with that sent a small group of security service forces of Ukraine to try and take control of what was going on inside, as well as sending a special commission into the zone. This special service did go on to witness some terrifying memos by one O.O. Dobronin, but were ultimately unsuccessful in shutting these down. Witnessing this, the researchers, who renamed themselves to simply The Group, continued their focus on the noosphere until finally breakthroughs started to take place, and their goal of using the noosphere to influence the whole of humanity's psyche on a global scale was moving forward well. This time, however, without the full funding of the Soviet government, hence the rebranding to The Group. Although this sounds like it was going to be for horrible reasons like forcing everyone into a specific political ideology or causing a mass war with everyone killing each other for some reason, the scientists actually did this with good intentions. I mean, isn't that the best thing at the end of the day, living in the world set on good intentions?
Well, my family and I can't live in good intentions.
The actual goal of all of this was to use the noosphere to influence humanity so that there was no more war, injustice, or conflict ever again. And with that eradicated, it would be a brand new era for humanity, one filled with peace and goodwill for all. This helped motivate the scientists as there was no real bad intentions with the end goal. If you got told you were researching a project that was to forge peace throughout the whole world, most people would want to back it, apart from maybe weapon manufacturers or something. That said, this goal was to be done at all costs, which means some dubious experiments were to be done to learn from how it all works. This was seen as a necessary evil, and without it, there was no way they could get their world peace. For this, a group of 7 scientists would merge their minds together in what was known as the C Consciousness Project, or Common Consciousness. The linking of minds to form a somewhat hive mind was said to be the only way to communicate with the noosphere directly, and with this set up, they would be able to learn more about how it works and how they could harness it. With all of this going on, the zone and area around Chernobyl was extremely peaceful during the years between 1991 and 2000, but that was all to change within the year of 2001, when a group of tourists who arrived on a bus in the zone suddenly disappeared, without anyone knowing where they went or what their ultimate fate was. Not only that, but rumors started circulating about strange phenomena happening within 10 kilometers or 6.2 miles of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The rumors based themselves mainly around the city of Pripyat, where strange creatures were reported as being seen, as well as other more paranormal things. Hearing of these situations, the government finally took action and closed off the whole zone from civilians to make sure no one else could disappear or die to the radiation still lingering on the surface near the power plant, or the strange creatures that were rumored to be out there. In 2005, not only had the government dissuaded tourists from entering the area, but the weather and atmosphere of the zone was also putting people off, as it was reported that unnatural forces were starting to influence themselves in the zone, and weather patterns were starting to develop new patterns, which included hurricane winds and ground tremors, making the zone even more hostile than it was before. Research continued on for 5 more years, where the group furthered their various types of experiments, some being shut down however, such as the electromagnetic rifle project within the Jupiter factory, which was said to be using far too much energy. But on the 4th of March 2006, the first big experiment on humans took place on a massive scale to see if it could actually work on the human psyche. Up to this point it had only really worked on animals, so this was the true test. It is unknown what exactly happened during this experiment. However, witnesses claim that a phenomenon of blinding light illuminated the sky up above the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. This lasted for a full 2 hours as the experiment went ahead, until suddenly the blinding light stopped, almost as if all of the power fueling it died, and with that it all went back to normal. A month later, on the 12th of April at 2:33 p.m, this experiment or phenomena happened again as the sky was fully illuminated by an intense bright light. The clouds completely evaporated into the silver bright sky, and with it an enormous crash of thunder hit the land, lasting far longer than usual. After the thunder died down, it was followed by an incredibly eerie silence for a few moments before the whole area was hit with a 6.9 magnitude earthquake. Whilst that was going on, the glow continued to light the area, spreading out to the whole of the region, all whilst deadly energy disturbances raged throughout the zone. Due to how hostile this area had become, any rescue attempt would be a death sentence, and anyone wanting to escape would be trapped and would have to just hope that they survived what was going on. Despite all of this, the experiment was completed this time, but the problem was it did not go the way they wanted at all. Instead, the generator had cut a hole in the noosphere above it, creating a rift which would also affect the biosphere massively, where the laws of physics were completely broken, and now the whole area was affected by mysterious phenomena that were not understood at all by modern science. With that all over, and now the nuclear power plant going through its second catastrophe, the scientists responsible, who had somehow amazingly survived, went on to have huge debates about what their next step would be after their grand experiment was ultimately a colossal failure, and now the land had been made even worse than before. With these researchers debating it out, half of the scientists would choose to leave the big group and form their own, named Clear Sky, who dedicated themselves to researching the zone as a whole and how they could possibly contain the rift that they had ultimately created. The other half that didn't break away, however, remained in the labs to focus once again on the sea consciousness experiment, as they felt they were near to a breakthrough and they could soon harness the power of the noosphere above and also suppress it. Eventually, the scientists were able to finally learn how to control this noosphere and do everything they wanted with it. However, it did come with a cost. The energy that they were taking in was so immense that they had to periodically release the excess into the atmosphere to make sure they weren't completely overwhelmed by it. To those who were witnessing all of the things going on within the zone, they would name this excess energy being released as a blowout or emission, as it would light the sky up in red and have lightning bolts rain down from the sky, something that was seen as absolutely terrifying and almost like it was the end of the world. The first recorded emission or blowout happened on the 10th of June 2006, an event that caught the military and scientific personnel also in the area completely off guard, as they would be obliterated by it as the zone went on to expand out a further 5 kilometers or 3.1 miles, officially labeling this as the second Chernobyl disaster. Seeing this happen and realizing that maybe they weren't as in control as they expected, the scientists decided they needed to find a new solution, and with it created a defense perimeter to protect themselves against any intruders trying to stop them or find out what was going on and fix the problem themselves. Together they set up a psychic defense network that would be named the Brain Scorcher, an experimental psi antenna located outside of Pripyat. Once this device was activated, any person that might go inside of this area would be taken over by this device, and and their mind would be fully controlled by the sea consciousness, and with that, they would become a pawn for their ultimate goal. Alongside the brain scorcher, the group would also set up a powerful device called the monolith, or the wish granter, as well as a load of protectors. The goal of the wish granter or monolith was to lure people in, with the lure being something that they really desired, such as wealth or ultimate power. Located in the center of the power station, this would be used to trap someone to protect the sea consciousness from being found, and after this device grants the wishes of those individuals, it would then completely brainwash them and force them into working for the sea consciousness as a monolith cultist, and would also expand the zone out even further by another 5 kilometers or 3.1 miles. That said, not many have supposedly found this wish granter, as it is incredibly difficult to get to, what with all of the protection the sea consciousness has, but those who have said to go to it haven't ever returned, or if they have completely lost their mind, being extremely brainwashed, or have just outright died. Only one man has said to have reached it, that being a man simply known as Doc or Doctor, who supposedly reached it and survived to tell the tale. That said, it is not confirmed and has now just become a part of the local folklore amongst the people living within the zone. The other protectors who work alongside the sea consciousness actively raid groups' camps and defend research facilities to once again stop anyone knowing of the secrets of this area. With the second disaster now over, the Ukrainian military took drastic action as they would move into the center of the zone with one sole objective. That was to fully destroy it with the use of nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, the military were completely unprepared for what this area had to offer, as they did not bring any protective gear, any proper equipment such as anomaly detectors, and had no real knowledge about what the zone had on offer, which just led to an utter slaughter of many of the soldiers as they would be killed by the anomalies and mutants living there. Ultimately, the operation was a complete failure, and the survivors of this operation were forced to scatter out into the rest of the zone, trying desperately to fend for themselves against everything the zone had on offer. Captain Tichenko, who was the squad leader of a specific group of survivors, would go on to completely sabotage the communications of his squad to prevent them from calling HQ, and with that, decided it was time for them to create their own unique group out within the zone that was dedicated to tackling and wiping out what they called its spawns of evil, that group being known as Duty. By 2010, expeditions into the zone were still taking place. In the year before, one group who ventured into the area with the correct protective suits and new anomaly detectors were able to travel around 1 kilometer deep into the zone and returned without incident or injury, proving to many that it was possible to go into the zone without being wiped out by everything within it. With that in mind, by August 17th, 2010, the first ever Stalker camp was said to be found abandoned in this area, as well as the first artifact that would be found and taken back. This was also the first time that someone witnessed the events of a blowout whilst being in the zone itself. After this journey, it became clear that there were specific individuals who were willing to risk their lives to journey into the zone to hunt down these artifacts to sell on the market for large sums of money. These individuals would be labelled or self-labelled as stalkers, which was actually an anagram issued by the Ukrainian government for those who were illegally residing in the zone of alienation, and stood for scavengers, trespassers, adventurers, loners, killers, explorers, and robbers. Within this year, it was said that 300 of these individuals lived inside the zone and were hunting artifacts. However, by 2011, the stalker population began to grow more and more, despite a real effort by the military to cordon it off from those trying to get in. For a time, the military just let it go or were unable to do anything about it, but eventually the stalkers and the military had their first skirmish on October the 25th, 2011, where the military decided that all stalkers would be shot on sight, and on top of that would seize all artifacts in the area for themselves. At this same time, stalkers also started reporting the first sightings of zombies in the zone. This came from an unknown stalker out within the area of Yantar, who claimed that these zombies spoke in what sounded like muffled English, and said that these zombies could have been the tourists that went missing back in 2001. Whilst this was going on, one stalker known as Strelok, who was one of the first stalkers to venture into the zone and acquire artifacts to bring back, would find a map of the underground city located below Pripyat. Realizing this was the answer for how he could get into the center of the zone, he and his associates ventured out to reach it. The first raid here, however, was unsuccessful, as when Strelok's group, which included other stalkers of Ghost and Fang, reached the sarcophagus, a concrete structure built around the destroyed reactor unit 4 at the power station, were unable to progress further due to a code-locked door. Almost accessing their secret, the Sea Consciousness was furious by their actions getting past all of their defenses, and with it released a massive emission to try and kill them all, which massively affected the zone even further, leading to loads of routes to now be closed as new anomalies littered the old paths. With this, however, all 3 of them would survive, but Strelok would be majorly injured, only to be recovered by the Doctor and his 2 friends. Now deciding that it was Strelok's duty to venture to the center once again, his once friend Scar, as well as the Clear Sky faction who saved him, would venture out to stop Strelok from reaching it. Fighting through all of the Sea Consciousness Guardians known as the Monolith faction, Strelok would be cut down before he could do what he planned to. But before Clear Sky could finish the job in their fight against the Monolith faction, yet another massive emission would occur that reached levels way above the norm. This unfortunately wiped out everything within the proximity, which was the full Clear Sky faction, as all of them are seen huddled in a corridor within the nuclear power plant, shaking, making it clear that the Sea Consciousness was now mind controlling all of those hit by the emission, which included Strelok, who would now become one of the agents of them. That said, with his mind controlled, his new goal was a very odd one, as the Sea Consciousness would have him hunt down and kill the Strelok, essentially himself somehow. But on top of that, he had lost all of his memory about the situation and did not know who this Strelok was. Being left within a death truck with multiple other bodies of brainwashed individuals of the Sea Consciousness being sent back into the zone to do their bidding, this truck would go on to crash, and the marked one of Strelok would be found by another stalker and brought back to a trader of Sidorovich, who helps guide him on his mission of hunting down himself. Going from contact to contact, Strelok would eventually find a way to block out the effects of the brain scorcher, finding a fully functional psi protection device whilst in the secret lab of Lab X-19, whilst also witnessing the body of his old friend Ghost, who would contain information on where to go next. Eventually, after meeting up with the Doctor from a year ago, he would be told everything that he needed to know, that the monolith is a lie, and that he himself is Strelok, who was on a mission before being taken over by the Sea Consciousness. With that, Strelok would fight through the monolith troops once again, and eventually found a way to fully deactivate the brain scorcher, making his way toward Pripyat after that. Seeking out other fellow stalkers, Strelok would eventually get to the nuclear power plant that would be heavily guarded by the elite monolith troops, as well as being under attack by the Spetsnaz trying to destroy the center. But somehow, despite all of the odds, Strelok would get into the reactor 4 area of the sarcophagus and take out the best of the best monolith troops. Eventually, he would encounter a hologram of the Sea Consciousness who would explain everything to him and what their ultimate goal was, eventually giving him an ultimatum of joining them or dying. Of course, Strelok would refuse and would fight through the plant, eventually making it to where the 7 scientists forming the Sea Consciousness were located, all in their own green stasis pods. Taking off his AKM-74, Strelok would shoot the pods containing the Sea Consciousness subjects and ultimately destroyed the ones responsible for the formation of the zone and everything wrong within it. With the Sea Consciousness now gone and the brain scorcher also disabled, the northern part of the zone had opened up for all to venture into. This allowed the Secret Security Service to launch a full-scale military assault, which would be codenamed Operation Fairway, to try and take the CMPP from the remaining Monolith Guardians, who were somehow still there and protecting their supposed god inside of the plant. With this, maps were made of the zone detailing where specific anomaly fields were to make sure their flight path could be safe to fly into. However, despite thorough planning, the military mission was a failure, as the anomalies were able to adapt every time there was an emission, meaning that their maps were always outdated. As the 5 helicopters were sent in with their troops, they would all be taken out by those said anomalies, leading to the security service to send in their agent, Major Alexander Dekhterev, to investigate what went wrong, whilst posing as a stalker himself. Throughout his journey, he would uncover the experiments happening here within the zone and what had been happening over the years in different areas, eventually meeting up with Strelok himself, who would explain everything about how the zone works and why his choppers fell whilst on their mission. Ultimately, the Major would go on a rescue mission here to extract the survivors, but Strelok said they would have to make a new map every time there was a newer mission. Only then would they be able to get in the choppers and save the survivors. In the end, after fending off mutants, zombies and monolith troops, the extraction was a success and they could leave the zone to potentially plan another attack at some point. With Strelok surviving the final attack, he would hand over all of the materials he had found in the zone and gave them to the government, which helped create the Scientific Institute for Research of the Chernobyl Anomalies area, with Strelok becoming the chief scientific consultant as well. With that, the zone is still out there and is as hostile as ever, constantly changing by the day. Many stalkers still venture into this land, hunting down the anomalies, mutants and hostile forces, trying to also lend a hand to anyone that needs help in this dangerous region. Only the bravest and most dexterous are able to survive, and maybe one lone stalker will be able to change the course of the zone forever, or make it worse depending on their actions. But that is a story to be explored really soon. For now, this has been the story behind how the zone was formed and how it became a hotspot for a ton of anomalies, vicious mutants and warring factions, all looking out for their own unique ambitions. I want to say a big thank you for watching this video, and I hope you all enjoyed this look into the Stalker universe. I'm currently playing through the second game now, so if this goes down well, expect to see many more Stalker lore videos on this channel really soon. I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons for supporting me, including my small fishes, my big fish Noxvox, my YouTube channel Wise Ones, Videogamer75 and Sith Lord 906, my sharks Jack T and Jason X117, and my megalodons Sinus, Neopark and Hazy Thoughts. Check out the links below for merch and audio versions. Give the video a like and subscribe for more content like this. And with that all said, I shall see you all in the next one. Cheers.